All right, so one of the biggest things that have happened in the past several weeks was Adidas has released a new shoe that is basically fully recyclable. And one of the people FDRA always goes back to is Nico with the Footwearists when we're talking about new types of materials or new types of designs and production, because the Footwearists, of course, are some of the most thoughtful people in our industry, looking at all kinds of new things that are occurring. So, Nico, you wrote a really great piece on LinkedIn, which I'll go ahead and display that now on our screen, where people can take a look, and then they can go find this on LinkedIn and take a look. But this is something really unique and really cool, and I think it's a defining moment. I'm not sure how you feel about it, but maybe give us an idea of what this is and what this means for the industry.
Yeah. No, I definitely do think it's a defining moment. Is it the perfect solution to everything yet? No, not yet. But it is an absolutely major achievement. As you saw in the pictures that you pulled up right now in the interview, in the article, you can see that actually at first sight, there's nothing different from this shoe compared to like Adidas Ultra Boost and other styles that they've released in the past years. But what is unique about it is that it's all TPU. So what they managed to do is to make a shoe where the compound for the boost outsole is a TPU. There's a same compound TPU yarn and any type of TPU film or more rigid plastic parts that are reinforcing the shoe, and the whole thing is essentially made of only that TPU. And that is the big difference between this shoe and other shoes that people would say are recyclable. I mean, Technically, pretty much anything is recyclable. The problem has always been that as we start recycling footwear, since it's so multi-material, that essentially the way shoes are recycled, they essentially grind them up in a big shredder. They're not disassembled or anything. They go into a shredder, and then the materials are separated using essentially a series of machines that separate the materials based upon density.
That's even if you have the machine to do it, correct? I mean, that's in the landfill.
That's already should the shoes end up in a recycling process? Because I think the other big misconception is, and that's a separate thing from the Adidas shoe, is that when you just throw your shoes away in the regular waste stream, they are not recycled.
Right.
So it's not true that they are separated out of that waste stream. The waste stream is handled slightly differently, whether it's in the US or Europe, where we don't have landfill, where the US does have landfill. Right. In our case, it's more incineration, and also happens in the US. But that's technically how the general waste stream is treated. Right. Then you have several programs also from several brands and organizations that collect footwear and textiles, clothing separately. And those go into a specific recycling system. Okay. So that's already only part of the shoes. And then the end result of that recycling system is basically different types of granulate. So it's foams, leathers, different types of rubber/plastic compounds of soles.
So it's still very hands-on. Then you got to separate it, then you have to have the machines.
Yes.
The shoe is a little bit different because it takes a different process.
Actually, that is the one thing that is not clear yet from the information that Adidas has released so far. So the big achievement is to make a shoe that is essentially all the same TPU, but doesn't look like that. Because before we would think of a mono material, as we call it, shoe, that would be something like a Croc, for instance.
Right.
Then people understand, oh yeah, that's mono material. And here, if you look at that shoe, people wouldn't really understand from looking at it that it's essentially all the same ingredient that it's made of. Now, how the recycling of the actual shoe will eventually happen, there was no information published about that as far as I know. And of course, it will be very important. That's also what I write about in the article in depth, how to do that recycling process, because you will want to separate that shoe from other waste streams of footwear, because the attractive bit is that as you grind this shoe up and you remelt all those different pellets, you don't have to separate the sole compound and the upper. You can put it on the shredder, you remelt it, you make it back into TPU pellets, and those TPU pellets you could reintroduce back into footwear manufacturing. And that is where the main difference lies with other multi-material shoes and the way they're recycled. So usually if it's a multi-material shoe, it would be like a basketball court. You've seen, of course, the Nike initiatives there, the backing of a carpet. And here, the purpose of Adidas is to eventually, because they're not there yet, turn this into a fully circular system where you can recycle that shoe over and over and over.
So it's pretty impressive considering the look of it is quite aesthetic, right? If you think of a mono material where it's one piece, sometimes it's not aesthetically pleasing to the consumer, so that people who really care about sustainability might buy something like this. But Adidas has done a lot of work to make it where it looks like one of the traditional sneakers that people really would look at and may not even know that it has a mono material. It's so a lot of engineering went into making it mono material, but a lot of work also went into making it look aesthetic and like a typical sneaker.
Because I think people who don't know footwear manufacturing don't realize how extremely difficult that is.
Now, do you consider this a real mark in redesign? I mean, when we did our Footwear Design Summit last year in LA, and we've got one coming up with the Footwearists and FDRA in New York in November. And we talked a lot about designing to production, designing to sustainability. So thinking about the future outlay of material and the product. Is this something where we're starting to see that come about?
Yes and no. So I think Adidas is right to make sure that the shoe has the same aesthetic as their other shoes, because consumers don't want to compromise aesthetic. Right. I've had responses to the article as well where people were like, people just have to like the style of sustainability. And I was like, how should sustainability be a style? You don't want it to be a style. You essentially want any product to be, produced sustainably.
Well, if that was the case, we'd just be walking around barefoot, wouldn't we? Design that really looks green has also done a bit of a disservice to the cause of sustainable footwear, because people were also turned off by the look of it, where they're like, oh, this granola look, we don't like it, it's very green. So this is not that. At the same time, though, maintaining that look and therefore also basically keeping the method of construction as similar as possible as regular construction, it also gives you a lot of difficulties in making. So I could also imagine where it would have been easier to make a very good looking mono material shoe by redesigning the construction as such. So for instance, one of the things that Adidas was struggling with is the fact that you don't use an adhesive now, because that would contaminate the material essentially. So they melted it together, which is possible but not easy. So it required quite an adjustment in the process. I could also imagine where you create a shoe in a different way and you don't have to use an adhesive or melt the parts together at all, because they kind of click together or, are essentially not attached to each other, or upper and bottom are not attached. Right. But in that case, you will get a different aesthetic than the other Adidas shoes that people already know. So I do understand why they made that design decision at this point. I do think that as we work further towards not just single sustainable shoes, but really full systems, which is why this is so interesting from Adidas. The idea is to create a full circular system. Then if we do want to run those systems, yes, then I would prefer to redesign footwear construction from scratch. Okay. So, what about some other, you had something like 60 or 100 comments on this article, so you got a lot of that. What were some other interesting points that people brought up that you think is very important to talk about as well, about the shoe and this process and the idea of recyclability?
Yeah. Well, I think the first big discussion point for many people was, when they read it and figured out that actually only 10% of any new shoe can be the recycled TPU at this moment, they were like, it's a bogus concept and it's just a marketing gimmick and this is not worthwhile. I don't agree to that. It is a first step. Adidas was also not secretive about that in their own material. They did talk about that, even though a lot of the journalists that had seen the shoe misrepresented that. They were like, oh, this shoe can just be recycled continually over and over 100%. No, that's not true. Right. And that's also not what Adidas says. But Indeed, it's now only 10%, and that's only after the first cycle. As you keep recycling the TPU, I mean, TPU or any type of plastic, as you start grinding it up, as you wear it and then grind it up, use it again, it loses quality.
It breaks down.
So
right?
It breaks down. So that's why you cannot reuse it 100%. So that was point one where I was like, okay, no, this is a first step. For the future, what we mainly need, but we're not there yet, is a different system of recycling. So rather than saying we're going to grind everything up, we're looking at what we would call waste to chemicals, chemical recycling, where eventually you would be using depolymerization, breaking down the polymers back into their basic building blocks so that you end up with the base chemicals again and can then reintroduce those into the process,
right.
Which still doesn't always mean you can recycle 100%, but you could get much higher percentages out of that. But it's in its early stages. We've seen some of that for PET, right. But not so much yet for flexible materials where it's a bit more difficult.
I feel like that is like an industry-wide initiative at that point, because it seems like that is a lot of investment to put into making that happen for one company, right? Who still has to profit and give shareholder value. So I completely agree with you, but it seems like there needs to be like a coming together of, and I think some brands are getting there. I think some brands start working closer together. So well,
the coming together there is also about, it's not even just within the industry, it's crossovers between industries. So like, I mean, Adidas has developed this shoe with BASF, which is a longtime partner of theirs. Of course, there's a lot of big plastic producing companies,
right?
And those are the first partners that we need to do that with.
That's a great point.
Together with waste management facilities and government, because it will also not eventually, in my opinion, not really make sense to have every single brand take back its own shoes and then ship that somewhere. I mean, eventually, I could imagine that it's a municipality that somehow takes care of collecting the waste, and then getting it to chemical recycling. Right. But we're not there yet. We ourselves in November have a new training for footwear waste management system.
Yeah.
Here we actually do visit a lot of these chemical companies, plastics companies, and also companies in biofabrication that are working on new ways of recycling, to also show people how that is actually working, what is happening now, how are shoes treated in the waste stream, what is cutting edge research, and what direction is it going, and how can we really design footwear for a circular system.
All right, so that's a good point to kind of wrap up our discussion today. But the Footwearists do a ton of really interesting, dynamic, impactful training from workshops and summits. Obviously, they work with FDRA a lot, helping us develop good content for our summits and also run the design summit. But you just mentioned that initiative. Are there other workshops that people should be thinking of around this? And then also make sure you tell us the website so people can get to the website.
Okay, everything is on our footwearists.com website, where we have a training section where they can find that. We also have various training sections on footwear design and manufacturing management, especially when it comes to how to implement new technologies. And one of those trainings is also for more sustainable design. This is not so much a course for designers, but for design managers to really understand how to change the system in which they design footwear to make that a lot more sustainable. And we'll go into a lot of the misconceptions that people have. That was also one of the other big responses I got to the article, which I think is a good one to mention as a final one, which is the comments of people saying, oh, this is really bogus because they should have just used bioplastic, because you can already make fully sustainable plastic that is biodegradable.
Right.
It's exactly those types of misconceptions that we are addressing also in the course, because yes, there is such a thing as bioplastic, which generally doesn't mean that it is a plastic that is 100% of natural material. It's 100% bio-based. Usually it's still plastic, but with a bio component.
Right.
That also doesn't mean that it's biodegradable. I mean, again, like with recyclable, everything is essentially biodegradable,
right.
But it, depends on how long does that take. And also, at this moment, a lot of these materials are not market ready. I talk in the article quite at length about biofabrication, which is not the same as bioplastics, essentially culturing materials in a lab, which I do think is, a very important development for the future. And I know Adidas is also interested in that. And I know this is a big thing of Parley that they work with as well. But this is further down the line. It doesn't mean that we don't need the initiatives like the Futurecraft Loop at this moment. It will be a process of many steps. And even if we can biodegrade everything, it doesn't mean that we want to. Biodegradation is not the same as you just put it in your garden and it just vanishes.
Right.
I wish it was that simple, but it's not that simple. So those are all the things that from different angles, whether it's from the management perspective or the R&D perspective, that we talk about in various trainings that we have.
Awesome. Well, this is always fun to talk to you. Again, this is Nico. You can go to her LinkedIn page and check out that article. And of course, she's going to be at our upcoming material summit talking about emerging materials, just like we talked about today. This is a good plug for that, but also our design summit and many other things, because I think, as you heard today from our discussion, there is a lot of marketing and a lot of buzz around product and materials. And if you really want to know what's happening, you got to have in-depth conversations. It can't just be cursory ideas, or you can't bring old ideas to the equation and table. You've got to talk to people and really understand what's happening in our industry, and other industries as well, as Nico pointed out. Happening where we can grab these practices.
Yeah, what was interesting, we got a lot, for instance, the footwear waste management one, we got so much, I didn't even expect so much interest from people from outside the footwear industry.
Right.
Because essentially, if you understand how to recycle footwear, which is so many different processes involved, so many different materials, then you can solve any other type of process. Yeah. We've had people from completely different industries who were like, I want to go join your course.
Right.
Because I need to know this as well. And even though I don't do footwear, it answers so many of the questions that I have and issues that I'm struggling with. So that was definitely very interesting. I've had huge online retailers, department stores that are also preparing for their own recycling systems for many different products to come to this training.
Very cool. Yep. Thank you very much for your time.
Okay.
And we'll post this on footwearinnovation.com, and hopefully we'll do some more video series like this down the road as interesting topics and products keep popping up. So stay tuned. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Andy.